Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the horror thriller films from 1980, titled The Shining. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie opens with a car driving up a deserted road deeper into the mountains, and it eventually arrives at the enormous and isolated Overlook Hotel. The scene then cuts inside the hotel, where a man named Jack Torrance arrives for an interview, and meets the manager, Ullman. In another scene, we meet Jack's wife Wendy, and their young son, Danny, in their apartment. We learn that the family will be moving to the hotel for the winter. Danny seems excited about the move, since he doesn't have many friends in the city anyway. But the disturbing part is that he has an imaginary friend named Tony, who clearly isn't happy about moving into that hotel. Wendy thus tries to assure him that they'll have a pleasant experience. Returning to the interview, Jack reveals that he's a former teacher, and is now focused on writing a book. We then learn that the Torrance family will be responsible for taking care of the hotel during its 5-month winter closure. However, Ullman warns him about the crushing effects of prolonged isolation, and shares the hotel's dark past from 1970, when the previous caretaker, Grady, went completely insane. He brutally murdered his wife and 2 daughters with an axe, before unaliving himself with a shotgun. But Jack doesn't seem scared, and even says that his wife is a horror enthusiast who will be fascinated by this story. Back in the apartment, Danny wonders if his dad will get the job, so Tony claims that he has already gotten it, and he'll be calling Mom soon. Strangely, Jack soon calls Wendy to deliver the good news. Danny then asks his imaginary friend why he doesn't want them to move to the hotel, but the latter remains silent. At this moment, the boy suddenly sees a terrifying vision of the hotel, where a torrential waterfall of blood gushes through the elevator, and 2 sisters are seen eerily standing in the distance. The scene then shifts to the closing day of the hotel, when the family prepares for their new life, and heads off to the mountains. After a long drive, they finally arrive at the hotel, where Ullman greets them, and leads the couple on a tour of the place. Elsewhere, Danny is alone in the game room and throwing darts when, all of a sudden, he sees the 2 creepy girls from his vision. The boy is paralyzed with fear, but the girls stare at him intensely for a few seconds before leaving. On the other hand, Ullman shows the couple an imposing hedge maze on the hotel grounds, which is nearly 13 feet high. He adds that the site was once an ancient Native American burial ground, and that the builders had faced violent attacks from the local tribes while constructing the hotel. Once inside, Ullman shows them a huge ballroom, where they also come across the head chef, Halloran. Danny joins them at this point, so Halloran decides to take Wendy and the boy to the kitchen, while Ullman continues with Jack. In the kitchen, Halloran shows them the massive pantry and freezer, which are packed with a variety of meats and other provisions they will rely on during the long winter. Later, Wendy joins her husband to tour the basement, leaving Halloran and Danny alone. The chef then takes the boy for ice cream, and suddenly tells him that he knows about his psychic ability, which he calls the Shining. He reveals that he and his grandmother used to communicate without speaking, and for a long time, they thought they were the only ones with this gift. The stunned boy then tells him about his friend Tony, who shows him visions during sleep, but he can't remember them when he wakes. It turns out this ability also allows them to see visions from the past or the future. Danny then inquires about room 237, and whether Halloran is afraid of it, which sends a jolt of fear through Halloran. Worried, he firmly tells the boy that there is nothing in that room, and warns him to stay away from it at all costs. The scene then cuts to a month later, where we see that the family's stay has been wonderful till this point. Danny is seen riding his tricycle in the hallway, while Wendy brings breakfast in bed to her husband. The couple then begins chatting, and Jack reveals how, since his arrival, he's been haunted by a strange sense of déjà vu, as if he had been to the hotel before, and already knew every corner of the place. In the afternoon, Wendy and Danny are exploring the hedge maze, and marveling at its size.
Woo, we made it. Isn't it beautiful? Yeah.
Meanwhile, inside the hotel, Jack stares at a model of the maze with a menacing focus. The scene then cuts to Tuesday, where a news report on TV reveals that a fierce snowstorm has begun to rage across the region. Meanwhile, Danny is riding his tricycle through the empty hallways again. But as he passes room 237, he stops and hesitantly tries to open the door, but it turns out to be locked. At this point, Jack's behavior starts to change in a strange way, and he appears to be losing his mind, becoming easily angered. On Saturday, Wendy tries to make a phone call, but discovers that all the lines are dead. She finally resorts to the radio to contact the forest rangers, who inform her that the storm has damaged many phone lines, and they likely won't be repaired until spring. They warn her to keep the radio on at all times, and contact them in case any trouble arises. Elsewhere, Danny rides his tricycle through the hotel's corridors, right when he suddenly spots the two girls from his earlier vision. They call his name, and invite him to play. He then gets a brief glimpse of their bloodied bodies on the floor, with an axe nearby, which causes the panicked boy to cover his eyes. But when he finally looks again, the girls are gone. He tells Tony that he is scared, so the latter reminds him of something Halloran once said: "These visions aren't real, and they're like pictures in a book." The following Wednesday, Danny is playing with his toy cars in the hallway, right when a ball unexpectedly rolls towards him. He thinks it's her mom, and when he moves forward, he is surprised to see that the door of room 237 is open. Curious, he carefully tries to enter. Elsewhere, Wendy is in the basement when she hears a blood-curdling scream, and rushes to investigate. She finds Jack trembling in his workspace, and it turns out he just had a terrifying nightmare. He frantically tells her that he had a dream about murdering his wife and child with an axe, and even hacking them to bits. But Wendy tries to calm him, assuring him that it's just a nightmare. Here, we see Danny slowly walking toward his parents, and Wendy is terrified to see his clothes have been shredded, and a hand-shaped bruise has formed on his neck. Panicked, she accuses Jack of doing this, but he is confused and doesn't understand what's happening. After the mother and son leave, an agitated Jack heads toward the hotel's empty ballroom, and sits down in front of the vacant bar. But seconds later, a bartender shockingly shows up, and Jack recognizes him as Lloyd. A shelf full of bottles also appears out of nowhere, so Lloyd serves him a drink, and Jack checks his wallet, only to realize he has no money. But the bartender doesn't seem concerned, and eerily responds that his credit is fine. While enjoying the drink, Jack confesses to Lloyd that he loves his son, and would never do anything to hurt him. Moments later, a frantic Wendy bursts into the bar, which is now suddenly empty, and tells her husband that a crazy woman in the hotel tried to strangle Danny. Jack thinks his wife has lost her mind, but Wendy insists that Danny said one of the room's doors was open, and there was a woman inside the bathtub who attacked him. Miles away, Halloran is in his apartment when he's suddenly hit by an unexplainable jolt, and his eyes widen in shock. At the same time, we see Danny convulsing in the hotel, and it seems like he is attempting to communicate with the old man. In another scene, Jack arrives at room 237 to investigate, and there he finds a young naked woman in the bathtub. She gets up and moves toward him, so the mesmerized man also steps closer, after which the two shockingly begin to kiss. But in the mirror, he sees that her body has rotted away and she's just an old woman, which scares the shit out of him. The woman lets out a maniacal laugh and attempts to get closer, but a horrified Jack quickly gets out of the room and locks it. Elsewhere, an alarmed Halloran tries to contact the hotel to find out what's happening, but the call doesn't go through, leaving him anxious. On the other hand, Jack returns to his wife and tells her that he didn't find anything in room 237. A panicked Wendy wonders where the bruises came from, so Jack theorizes that maybe the boy did it to himself. Meanwhile, we see Danny in his room, where he notices the word, "Redrum," scrawled in red letters on the door, which sends a shiver down his spine. At the same time, Wendy insists that they need to get Danny out of the hotel and leave immediately, but this causes Jack to erupt in fury, and he accuses her of trying to sabotage him just as he finally has a chance to achieve something in life. He firmly declares he won't let her ruin his life and storms out violently, while poor Wendy breaks down in tears. Fuming with anger, Jack begins throwing dishes in the kitchen, but then he hears music drifting from the ballroom, and moves toward it. And then all of a sudden.
Good evening, Mr. Torrance. Good evening.
Shockingly, the room is filled with elegant guests, in a style reminiscent of the 1920s. Lloyd serves him a drink, but when Jack tries to pay, the bartender calmly refuses, saying that his order is on the house. Shortly after, Jack is accidentally jostled by a waiter, who spills drinks on his clothes. The waiter apologizes, and the two head to the bathroom to clean up. There, the man reveals that his name is Delbert Grady, which shocks Jack, as it's the same name as the previous caretaker who died at the hotel. And so, Jack tries to confirm if Grady ever worked here as a caretaker, but the latter denies it. Jack asks about his family, and Grady reveals that he has a wife and 2 daughters. Suddenly, Grady advises Jack to remain vigilant, warning that Jack's son is attempting to bring in an outside party, specifically a black cook. Jack claims it is all Wendy's fault, arguing that she constantly interferes in their lives. However, Grady just urges him to assert control over his family, and correct them like Grady once did with his own family. Later, Jack arrives at the radio room, and hears the forest rangers desperately trying to contact the family. But he shockingly sabotages the radio, which completely severs any connection to the outside world. Shortly after, Halloran calls the Forest Service to check on the family, and the ranger grimly informs him that all attempts to reach them have failed. Realizing that something has gone horribly wrong, Halloran boards a flight the next morning, determined to reach the hotel as quickly as possible. In the next scene, Wendy arms herself with a bat, and goes to talk to her husband. She can't find him in his workspace, so she approaches his typewriter to see what he has been working on. But a wave of terror hits her when she finds the pages filled with the same phrase repeated over and over again: "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." Before she can process what's happening, Jack suddenly appears behind her, asking if she likes his work. He then questions what she's doing here, and she nervously responds that she wanted to talk about something. Upon hearing this, Jack asks if she wants to talk about Danny, and what must be done with him. Wendy says she wants to take their son to a doctor, but this only fuels Jack's rage. He accuses her of failing to grasp the weight of her responsibility in an angry and menacing voice. Also, he reminds her that he signed a contract, and has been entrusted with the care of the hotel, which he can't ignore. A terrified Wendy tries to leave, but Jack follows her, so she desperately begs him not to hurt her. Instead, he menacingly responds that he isn't going to hurt her, but will bash her brain. Fearing for her life, she does this.
Give me the bat. Ah, God damn!
A shaken Wendy then drags him to the kitchen, and locks him in the pantry, right when he starts to regain consciousness. An angry Jack bangs on the door, demanding that she let him out. He even tries to manipulate her, claiming that his head is badly hurt, and that he needs a doctor. Here Wendy tells him that she will use the snowcat to get out with Danny, and bring a doctor for him. But Jack says with a sinister laugh that she won't get anywhere, and dares her to check the snowcat and the radio. To her horror, when Wendy goes outside to inspect the snowcat, she discovers that he has sabotaged the vehicle, leaving them completely stranded at the hotel. Around 4 p.m., Jack is jolted awake by a knock on the pantry door, and it turns out to be Grady. He reveals that he and others are doubting Jack's strength to complete the task, as his wife seems to be stronger than him. But Jack assures him in a desperate tone that he can succeed if given just one more chance. Moments later, the pantry door suddenly swings open, and this will allow the crazy man to unleash chaos. Elsewhere, Halloran is desperately making his way towards the hotel in a snowcat. In another scene, Danny is seen approaching his sleeping mom while repeatedly saying "Redrum." He then takes a knife from the nightstand, and a red lipstick from the vanity. At the door, he writes the word "Redrum" with lipstick, and begins to chant the phrase loudly, which finally wakes his mother. She even more horrified to see the reflected word in the mirror, which says "murder" when reversed. Just then, a loud banging fills the room, and it turns out Jack is trying to chop the door open with an axe. Wendy locks herself and Danny in the bathroom, and desperately pushes him out through the small window. Unfortunately, when she tries to follow, the gap is too narrow, so she tearfully urges the boy to run and hide. Seconds later, Jack enters the bedroom, and finding the bathroom door locked, he swings the axe with terrifying force. Wendy now grips a knife and tries to steady herself. After cutting a section open, he sticks his head inside, and even reaches his hand through to try to unlock it, so Wendy slashes at him with the knife, forcing him to retreat in pain. Elsewhere, Danny arrives at the kitchen, and quickly hides inside one of the cabinets. Moments later, Halloran finally reaches the place, and calls out for the family, but no one answers him. However, as he cautiously moves through the hotel, Danny also senses this and screams in sheer terror, and this gives away his hiding spot, so Jack bolts after his son to kill him. The kid thus scrambles out of the cabinet and runs outside, while his deranged father follows him. Hearing her son's cries, Wendy bolts from the room in a desperate search for him. At the same time, Danny seeks refuge in the hedge maze, while Jack also limps after him. Danny, who has previously explored the maze with his mother, can easily navigate it, which gives him an advantage over his insane dad. Inside the hotel, Wendy continues her frantic search, and panic grips her as she comes across the lifeless body of Halloran. Things take an even more bizarre turn when she stumbles upon several ghosts of the hotel's past victims, sending a chill of terror through her. Back in the maze, Danny realizes his father can track him by his footprints, so he comes up with a smart plan. He walks backward over his own footprints, making his trail disappear, and completely confusing Jack. Meanwhile, inside the hotel, Wendy rushes to the elevator, where she sees the place flooded with blood. At the same time, Jack falls for his son's deception, and ends up lost in a dead end. Shortly after, Wendy manages to exit the hotel, just as Danny emerges from the maze. The relieved woman drops the knife and hugs him. The two then climb into Halloran's snowcat, and they finally speed away from the overlook, leaving behind the darkness and horror that nearly destroyed them. Meanwhile, a disoriented Jack wanders aimlessly through the maze, screaming and crying as the snowstorm intensifies around him. And then, the next morning, we see Jack's lifeless body buried half in the snow. In the final scene, we see a photograph of a lavish ball that has hung in the hotel this entire time. Surprisingly, Jack is in the center of the image, smiling among the elegantly dressed guests, with the caption "Overlook Hotel, July 4th Ball, 1921. This unsettling discovery implies that Jack has either always been a part of the hotel's haunted past, or has been absorbed into its malevolent legacy, hinting that the cycle of madness and violence will continue. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.